The Crooked Epic, 1, Innn, 1, The Inn of Maniacal Madness, 12, Christopher, The Innn 12b. Suddenly, Good's body was mended. His skin was regenerated and his bones realigned. His foot remained limp, and he puzzled at the functions of its ghostly presence. His pants were in shredded strands. The giants had gone, and he looked around Byzantine structures with walls standing, yet windows empty. There were no doors, no curtains, nor tapestries where there had been, and the roads out of the courtyard led out into a blank canvas of sky blue and pure green pastures. Barred. It was written in blood on a piece of skin, torn into a rectangular shape that resembled a book's page. It was the only thing in the courtyard remaining of Toro or the giants and their unexplained existence within this alien world. They had moved on like parasites seeking a new host or symbiotic organisms whose mutual bonds with their hosting animal have lost further use after death. As with Christopher Good's special place he had discovered here, there was space to hide with no food or water. At least, while he slowly walked around the inside of the giant's remote area, there was enough light to look at, fresh air to breathe, and possibly a space to recover before he decided which road to take out. But it was short-lived. His muscles still lacked hydration and nutrition. Otherwise, he would have made his grave, laid down on the courtyard lawn, stretched out and watched the false world slow on his own time. Northeast was the median to his endless journey, following the course set by Toro's estranged ride across the plateau. Yet as soon as he had crossed the line of biosphere containment, there was no turning back, as the buildings immediately crumbled to dust. This mooted purpose was quickly revised as he pushed on past shrubs and snaggled trees and brambling bushes. Something tapped his shoulder from behind, and he spun to look into two sad eyeballs, a mutated face that grinned with clinging adoration, mothering a foster desire to receive help for the lost father. If Christopher Good had not been already forced to adapt to nonsensical and fantastic events, he would have been as frightened as his sons would have been. As he made his first question directed at the humanoid, his raspy voice was perhaps just as scary to him as her answer in the introductory dialogue. "Who are you?" "Al." In an old woman's voice, she said, cycling deeply buried tones of estrogen and hormones to recreate some form of sexually excited response. He was confused and wondered if she had only used an enunciated syllable because of the odd shape of her mouth and tongue. Although it bore her pain, she forced a smile, showing it in her wriggling limbs and wriggling forehead wrinkles. The mutated woman, Al, seemed to assume that they had already established a personal connection of trust and started wobbling through the bushes until she sensed his non-cooperation. Christopher Good grinned from the tension, but kept his distance and shuffled as he balanced his lower plexus points and redistributed his weight on his good foot. The woman seemed to giggle as her torso jiggled, and a little drool drained down her chin and shined against her cheeks. She vaguely reminded him of his dead wife, Ella. Christopher pressed forward with the last of his energy into the night as she led the way. They were only about 15 miles from Hob, where she brought Mr. Good toward the end, encountering mostly drying and dead vegetation after the first mile away from the plateau. The wind howled sometimes, and Mr. Good could not help but shudder with fear of the flying dogs and their ferocious barking. When he had almost no momentum left, starving and aching, Elle spun over to him and gently prodded him with her arm, although she was uncoordinated with her hands. He took the gesture as an issue of steadying his pace rather than taking a seat on the crackling brown dirt and trimming dead foliage. She returned with a jubilating happiness for her accomplished communication, not noticing his slowed footsteps as he shuffled behind her. Al knew of a small spring, a half-decade prior, divined by Motu for his ranchers. When she bent to scratch at the water, she thought she would bring him water and delight, even though she had only wet her hands and palms. Luckily, he saw the sparkling flow and heard trickling drops, and Christopher Good ducked down to slurp it into his mouth as she cried in laughter. While they continued, Mr. Good's eyebrow ridge began bruising, and headaches caused him to press his forearms and his knuckles and palms against his forehead several times. This made his disdain for these deformities the contention of distress or sociological misconception for his guide's mutations. Hers were genetic, while his discomfort was anabolic, and together they were straggling through an malnourished delirium. However, her exuberance was clearly both inspirational to Mr. Good, as it was also a feministic byproduct of her incepted state. Mile after mile, her ecstatic behavior devolved into eccentricity. She forced herself to maintain her idea of a smile while wincing away pain. By the time they were near the church, Christopher had become irrationally paranoid and unaware of his juxtaposition to the caved-in catacombs. The river to the east drove home his desire to eat and drink, yet his unrest was not translated to Al, even when he began crouching at the riverside near the bridge. His hands again cupped the water to his mouth, and he heard her splashing. Al began making excessive cachinnation as her legs started shaking in the water. She finally vocalized her pain, moaning, grunting, and crying. Chris quickly saw her panic but drew back in fear, waiting for her to stop. He was impatient and began to circle her across the river, which was not as deep as his sons had imagined when they crossed the bridge earlier that summer. She rampaged out of the middle of the stream, chasing Christopher in furious confusion while he attempted to maintain control of his legs. As he scampered up the riverbank, she fell in the mud, disgracing herself in embarrassment. As he slowed his heart rate and looked back, she pulled herself up, forcing a grin across her soiled and furrowed facial features. The trio of pilots had not closely examined the town of Hob as they soared past overhead days before. As the two nomads walked through the gated entrance and between the watchtowers, Christopher Good walked into the territory as a sole pioneer. He felt eerie xenophobia, as if he was a prisoner of surveillance and hostility. If he had seen the watchtowers, empty except for the two corpses in both back closets, he would have seen the five-starred plants on the roofs, glowing green along with their sunken roots.